Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we'll delve into Wilford Brimley's life. He was born on September 27th in 1934 in Salt Lake, Utah. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, with the Great Depression still fresh in the national psyche and World War II looming, rural America was tough, resilient, and defined by a certain do-it-yourself ethic. Utah, where he spent his earliest years, was no exception. Families pulled together, communities relied on one another, and independence mattered almost as much as survival. If you wanted to learn how to ride, how to rope, or how to fix something, you just did it. There weren't always fancy schools or refined teachers for every skill. You might pick up knowledge from your father or your uncle, or maybe from a neighbor who'd been around long enough to show you the ropes. This self-reliance and readiness to adapt was the cultural environment that molded Brimley's personality, setting the tone for how he approached acting and life. He was never particularly enamored with the idea of glitz and glamour. By the time he reached adolescence, the entertainment business probably couldn't have been further from his mind. Brimley would later say that he didn't care much for big city living. In fact, he dropped out of school in the 8th grade, preferring hands-on work to classroom lectures. And that's precisely what he did. He found odd jobs, worked as a ranch hand, and eventually took up roles such as blacksmithing or even being a bodyguard at a film production company. Little did he realize that this proximity to movie sets, while protecting the people who were making them, would be his backdoor introduction to Hollywood. He wasn't there to audition, he was there to work. But fate has a funny way of unfolding for certain people. Some say it was Sidney Pollack who first noticed Brimley. Others believe Robert Duvall had a hand in giving him a nudge toward an acting career. But one thing's for certain, once Hollywood directors got a taste of that rugged authenticity, they knew he was different from the usual fresh-faced actors reading lines in a polished, overly theatrical manner. Brimley was no method actor. He simply was who he was. That beaming mustache, that stern expression that could melt into grandfatherly kindness without warning, and that sense of unwavering honesty won him small roles at first. And so began a career that would span over 40 years. Wilford Brimley wasn't a typical Hollywood hopeful. He had served in the United States Marine Corps during the Korean War era, stationed in the Aleutian Islands, far from the sunny glamour of Los Angeles. He returned to civilian life and drifted through jobs as ranch hand, wrangler, farrier, anything that put him close to horses and the open sky. Eventually, he found himself with that large frame and no-nonsense demeanor, working security for various studios. That's where the big break happened. Directors noticed he wasn't trying to be anyone but himself. He looked and sounded exactly like what many casting calls described, but rarely found. A genuine Western man who could bring credibility and grounding to on-screen roles. By the late 1970s, he started popping up in movies such as The China Syndrome, 1979, a thriller that starred Jane Fonda, Jack Lemmon, and Michael Douglas. That was his first big role of note, and while it was small, his performance stood out precisely because it wasn't showy. He delivered his lines with that quiet conviction, sounding more like a concerned neighbor who happened to stumble onto a nuclear meltdown cover-up than an actor reciting words on a script. It was the first hint to audiences that Wilford Brimley brought something special. He didn't overshadow the big names, but he made the world of the film feel more real. Soon after, he'd get a memorable turn in John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982, as the distrustful, sharp-eyed Dr. Blair, an older man among the younger ensemble, whose paranoia about the alien threat was central to the film's dread. Again, he wasn't the star, but somehow his presence lent the story a whole new heft, that sense of dread rooted in real, grounded fear. But it was Cocoon 1985, that arguably cemented him in the public consciousness as a cuddly grandfatherly type, even though amusingly he was much younger than the role suggested. Playing a retiree who encounters a life-altering discovery alongside other older folks, Brimley projected a believable mix of crankiness and childlike wonder. Many viewers, remembering the film decades later, think of Wilford Brimley as far older than he actually was at the time. His mustache, lines on his face, and overall gravitas made him feel perpetually in his late 60s, even though he was actually just barely 50 during the filming of Cocoon. From there, he quietly amassed an impressive list of credits. The Natural, 1984, with Robert Redford. Tender Mercies, 1983, also with Robert Duvall, and The Firm, 1993, where he took on the rare villainous turn as a menacing security chief. That last performance startled some fans. How could Wilford Brimley, the moral anchor in so many films, turn sinister? But he did it so well that many critics consider it among his best performances, proving that behind that mustache, he had range. Still, Brimley never cared about being top billed. He once said that leading roles carried too much noise. He liked being the side character who was there to tell the truth in a film, even if no one wanted to hear it. Part of the reason his performances felt so real was that he drew heavily on his own life. He didn't approach roles with method acting or lengthy script analysis. He simply channeled his direct experiences, moments of hardship, ranch life, fatherhood, and let them guide him in front of the camera. Colleagues who worked with him often remarked that Wilford Brimley was the same offset as he was on screen. Straightforward, kind but blunt, and possessed of a gentle but firm sense of right and wrong. In many interviews, he emphasized honesty and integrity, reiterating that if something didn't feel true, he couldn't play it. He refused to do scenes he thought were contrived or manipulative. Directors learned quickly that if they wanted Brimley, they had to let him be authentic, or else it simply wouldn't work. Of course, if you mention Wilford Brimley to certain crowds today, the first thing you might hear in response is a comedic echo of Diabeetus. This entire phenomenon harks back to the mid-1980s when Brimley became the spokesperson for Liberty Medical, which specialized in diabetes testing supplies. Brimley had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in the late 1970s, so the position was not just another endorsement deal, it was personal. Those commercials that ran on TV, especially in the 90s, featured Brimley speaking calmly about monitoring your blood sugar, about not being afraid to seek help, and about living a healthy lifestyle despite diabetes. Whether you found the ads corny or helpful, there was something undeniably genuine about him saying, "I'm Wilford Brimley, and I have diabetes." His unique pronunciation turned into a playful internet meme years later, but it also had a profound impact on countless individuals who were scared and confused by their diagnosis. Brimley brought them a sense of comfort. If this gruff, no-nonsense cowboy could handle it, maybe they could too. What many might not realize is how deeply personal that advocacy was. Brimley never intended to become a punchline. To him, it was important that people who struggled with diabetes understand they weren't alone. He himself had faced denial, anger, and the daily rigors of managing insulin and diet. He knew what it was like to worry about your health every waking moment. So while the meme culture that exploded online might have poked gentle fun, it also gave Brimley's commercials a second life, ensuring they reached younger audiences in a strange, roundabout way. Eventually, clips of him saying, "Check your blood sugar, check it often," or passionately reminding folks about the seriousness of the disease were shared widely on social media. In a world that sometimes cruelly mocks differences, Brimley managed to impart a sense of fatherly advice even in 30-second ad snippets. In a similar fashion, he became the face of Quaker Oats for a time. Again, there he was on TV telling viewers that oatmeal was the right thing to do and the tasty way to do it. That slogan became somewhat iconic, though ironically overshadowed by the diabetes ads. Still, it fit with his down-to-earth demeanor, and for a younger generation it was just another way to know Wilford Brimley's face without necessarily remembering his name. He was that oatmeal guy, or that diabetes guy, or the mustache guy from that old movie. And for many years that was enough. But behind the camera there was another chapter unfolding in Brimley's life. His deep devotion to his family and his steadfast refusal to play Hollywood. While many celebrities courted paparazzi or indulged in the glitz of film premieres, Brimley and his wife Lynn led a quieter life. They married in 1956, long before he ever set foot in a movie. Together they had 4 sons, and through decades of ups and downs, the couple stayed largely out of the public eye. Lynn's passing in 2000 was a deep blow to him. People close to him said that after she died, he retreated even further from the limelight, pulling back from major roles and spending more time on his ranch in Wyoming. The open spaces soothed him, and the horses, goats, and farmland reminded him of everything he cherished about a simpler life. Eventually, he did remarry in 2007, this time to Beverly Berry, someone who shared his love for the wide-open West. They mostly kept their life private, far from Hollywood, occasionally traveling or showing up for a cameo here and there, but never diving into the public swirl of celebrity. Wilford Brimley wasn't the type to do talk shows or chase magazine covers. Fame to him was secondary to living on his own terms. If anything, he found the whole machine of publicity to be a nuisance. The man who spent years as a security guard on set never lost that sense of detachment from Hollywood's bright lights. He liked being employed, sure. He liked playing interesting characters, but he didn't care for the nonsense, as he sometimes called it, that accompanied stardom. What many admirers might find surprising is the breadth of roles he took on in television. While film buffs remember him for his iconic movie appearances, Brimley also had a recurring presence on TV series such as Our House, a family drama that ran from 1986 to 1988. He portrayed Gus Witherspoon, a grandfatherly figure who provided wisdom and structure to a household that had lost its father. Yet again, he tapped into that fatherly or grandfatherly persona, stern, sometimes grumpy, but ultimately caring. It was a formula that continued to resonate with audiences. That said, he never became a leading man in the sense of center stage heroics. He was more akin to a bedrock, a moral or emotional anchor for the main characters. And for many viewers, that is precisely what they cherished. One cannot talk about Wilford Brimley without addressing some lesser-known personal stories that reveal the depth of his kindness and convictions. For instance, there's a story about him visiting a children's hospital, unannounced, sometime in the late 1980s. He was in town for a TV appearance, had a few hours to spare, and decided to drop by. Without alerting the media or turning it into a publicity stunt, Brimley spent time talking to the kids, telling them stories about ranch life and horses. The staff later recalled that he had an uncanny way of putting children at ease, using gentle humor and that warm grin. By the time he left, he donated some funds quietly and never spoke of it publicly. That was Wilford Brimley, a man who did what he thought was right without seeking applause. Another personal anecdote revolves around his temper, a short fuse that occasionally ignited if he felt someone was being dishonest or disloyal. He might explode in a flurry of words that could seem harsh, but minutes later he would calm down, apologize if he'd overstepped, and make amends. A longtime friend once remarked, "Wilford can blow up like a thunderstorm over the plains, but it passes just as quickly. He's a decent man. You just got to understand the weather." Indeed, that combination of crusty exteriors and fundamental decency mirrored the roles he played on screen. Perhaps no one was better at playing the exasperated father figure, telling the younger generation what they didn't want to hear. In real life, that directness came from an honest place. When it comes to controversies, Wilford Brimley's life wasn't rife with scandal, but he did occasionally court public debate. For instance, he was outspoken on certain political and lifestyle issues. He once publicly supported the traditional practice of cockfighting, seeing it as a part of rural heritage and personal freedom, an opinion that riled animal rights activists. While many were shocked that the kindly Diabeetus guy would defend such a blood sport, Brimley saw it through a cultural lens. To him, it was tradition, something that families in certain rural communities passed down through generations. He believed in leaving people to their own business, as long as it didn't obviously harm others. Critics naturally disagreed vehemently, pointing out the inherent cruelty. Brimley never apologized, maintaining that his views were consistent with individual freedom. Whether one agrees or not, it illustrates that the real man was more complicated than a kindly grandfather figure. He was at times stubborn and outspoken, especially about issues he believed were being misrepresented. Another point of occasional debate was his frankness in interviews regarding health and weight. Some found it ironic that a man with type 2 diabetes who occasionally admitted to being not the fittest guy in the room was dispensing health advice. Brimley, however, always clarified that his message was about responsibility, acknowledging one's condition and seeking practical help. He was never going to be a fitness model, and he didn't pretend to be. Instead, he used himself as a cautionary tale, urging viewers to learn from his experiences, not necessarily mimic him. This honesty and humility resonated with many who felt judged by more polished, picture-perfect spokespeople. Despite these mild controversies, Brimley generally kept a low profile. He wasn't the type to appear in tabloids or engage in Twitter spats, so any public debates involving him tended to fade quickly. Instead, his public persona remained shaped by his film roles and commercial appearances. Someone you could trust, gruff but well-meaning, occasionally crotchety, but anchored in a bedrock sense of honesty. As the new millennium rolled around, Brimley began to slow down. Age, of course, played a role, as did the natural winding down of a career that spanned decades. After Lynn's passing, he took fewer roles and spent more time on his ranch. Reports suggest he battled complications from diabetes and other ailments, including kidney issues in his later years. Health struggles became more pronounced, yet he remained private. There was no grand farewell tour or tearful final interview. By the 2010s, he was mostly away from the screen, occasionally popping up in small cameo roles or appearing in fan conventions dedicated to classic films like The Thing. In the summer of 2020, Wilford Brimley passed away at age 85 in St. George, Utah. His death was covered modestly by news outlets, typically referencing him as the Cocoon star or the diabetes spokesperson. Yet on social media, a surprising surge of grief and nostalgia erupted. People posted memes, sure, but also old photos, heartfelt recollections, and tributes. Hashtags like #Wilford Brimley trended for days, as fans from all generations realized that the quiet fixture in their entertainment memories was gone. Some were shocked to learn his name for the first time, having recognized the face but never the credits. There was no star-studded Hollywood memorial, just an outpouring of personal stories, fans reminiscing about how his presence on screen, even in small roles, brought comfort and a sense of moral clarity. In that sense, Brimley left behind a significant, if intangible, legacy. He never won an Oscar, never got an Emmy, and didn't have his name emblazoned on the Walk of Fame. Instead, he lived on in memories and the everyday references of countless Americans who grew up seeing him. Internet culture further enshrined him, ironically, through memes that turned a simple line about his diabetes into an affectionate signifier. Younger generations who might never have seen Cocoon or The Natural ended up encountering him through a funny snippet on YouTube or a GIF on social media. While other celebrities might chase that recognition and never quite achieve it, Wilford Brimley got it without even trying, simply by being a steady, honest presence in front of the camera. Culturally, one could argue that Wilford Brimley represented a certain archetype of American masculinity that's increasingly rare. The strong but tender father figure, the man who has no problem raising his voice to set you straight, but who does so out of genuine concern. In modern Hollywood, characters often lean on cynicism or irony. Brimley was almost old-fashioned in his earnestness. It's a trait that resonates with people hungry for authenticity. In his own quiet way, he influenced future character actors like J.K. Simmons and Sam Elliott, who share that grounded, unpretentious vibe. Indeed, many of them have acknowledged that they admired Brimley for his ability to be so believable with so little effort. If we look for lessons in his life, there's a powerful one about consistency and integrity. He might not have been a typical celebrity idol, but he maintained his values: love for family, a respect for honesty, personal responsibility, throughout his long career. While some stars find themselves entangled in scandal or shaped by the demands of fame, Brimley stepped into the limelight only when he had a job to do. He delivered genuine performances and helpful advice about health, and then he went back to what mattered: his horses, his family, and his solitude. He showed that fame needn't define you, that you can be part of the Hollywood system without letting it consume you. There's also a poignant lesson about how easily society forgets people who aren't bombastic self-promoters. For decades, Wilford Brimley was a nightly visitor in millions of American homes, and yet many never learned his name until he passed. That's not to say he was neglected. On the contrary, the flood of tributes proved how beloved he was, but it underscores how ephemeral recognition can be. We often remember images or impressions, not always the name or the backstory. In Wilford Brimley's case, though, the impression was lasting enough that when the time came, people felt genuine sadness. They might have said, "Oh, him, he was always there," and realized they'd lost a comforting constant in their cultural landscape. Yet, as all things do, that comedic angle eventually gives way to a sincere appreciation. Scratch the surface of those jokes, and you'll find countless stories of people who felt comforted by him in difficult times, whether it was a scary diagnosis of diabetes, a tough day at work, or just an uncertain moment late at night when an old Wilford Brimley film happened to be on TV. In that moment, hearing his voice or seeing his familiar face could be enough to feel just a bit less anxious. When the news of his passing spread in August 2020, it wasn't exactly front-page headlines in the entertainment outlets. But on social media, ordinary folks did something remarkable. They made him trend at #1 on Twitter in the United States for nearly 2 full days. It turned into a nationwide memorial of sorts, with fans sharing their earliest memories of seeing him in a film, reliving the commercials, or discussing how they found his plain-spokenness a refreshing contrast to the constant razzle-dazzle of stardom. In that sense, Wilford Brimley's departure was quiet, yet it sparked a groundswell of affectionate remembrance. It felt apt for a man who had always lived somewhere on the edges of fame, recognized mainly by his presence rather than his name, but adored all the same. And perhaps that's how Wilford Brimley would have wanted it. He once said something to the effect of, "I'm just me, and that's enough," when asked about his acting style. That simple statement captures the heart of his legacy. We often chase the idea of being extraordinary, but Brimley taught us there is deep power in just being who you are, especially when that self is grounded in integrity. He didn't need to stand on a soapbox about it. He showed it through decades of roles that embodied grit, warmth, and honesty, through commercials that might have seemed mundane but nonetheless changed lives, and through a private existence that reminded everyone that not all celebrities hunger for the spotlight. Looking back on the broader significance, Wilford Brimley's life stands as a testament to how every role, no matter how small, can become part of a cultural tapestry. He never headlined a blockbuster in the sense of being the sole marquee draw, yet his face became embedded in the collective memory of multiple generations. Directors relied on him to provide a grounding influence in stories that might otherwise feel contrived. Viewers felt that, even if they couldn't recall his name, they knew him. Decades later, new watchers continue to discover him, whether it's stumbling upon a vintage commercial or exploring 80s cult classics. It's a reminder that sometimes steady and genuine can outlast flashy and sensational.